And part of what gives me that confidence is the overwhelming response of the world community to the savagery of these terrorists. Not just revulsion, but a concrete commitment to work together to vanquish these organizations. At the United Nations in September, I called on the international community to come together and eradicate this scourge of violent extremism. And I want to thank all of you from across America and around the world for answering this call. Tomorrow at the State Department, governments and civil society groups from more than 60 countries will focus on the steps that we can take as governments. And I'll also speak about how our nations have to remain relentless in our fight. Our counter-terrorism efforts against groups that are plotting against our counties. But we are here today because of a very specific challenge, and that's countering violent extremism. Something that is not just a matter of military affairs. By violent extremism, we don't just mean the terrorists who are killing innocent people. We also mean the ideologies, the infrastructure of extremists, the propagandists. The recruiters, the funders who radicalize and recruit or incite people to violence. We all know there is no one profile of a violent extremist or terrorist. So there's no way to predict who will become radicalized. Around the world, and here in the United States, inexcusable acts of violence have been committed against people of different faiths. By people of different faiths, which is, of course, a betrayal of all our faiths. It's not unique to one group, or to one geography, or one period of time. but we are here at this summit because of the urgent threat from groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIL. And this week we are focused on preventing these groups from radicalizing. Recruiting or inspiring others to violence in the first place. I've called upon governments to come to the United Nations. This fall with concrete steps that we can take together. And today, what I want to do is suggest several areas where I believe we can concentrate our efforts. First, we have to confront squarely and honestly the twisted ideologies. That these terrorist groups use to incite people to violence. Leading up to this summit, there's been a fair amount of debate in the press. And among pundits about the words we use to describe and frame this challenge. So I want to be very clear about how I see it. Al-Qaeda and ISIL and groups like it are desperate for legitimacy. They try to portray themselves as religious leaders, holy warriors in defense of Islam. That's why ISIL presumes to declare itself the Islamic State. And they propagate the notion that America and the West generally is at war with Islam. That's how they recruit. That's how they try to radicalize young people. We must never accept the premise that they put forward, because it is a lie. Nor should we grant these terrorists the religious legitimacy that they seek. They are not religious leaders, they're terrorists. And we are not. At war with Islam. We are at war with people who have perverted Islam. Now, just as those of us outside Muslim communities need to reject the terrorist. Narrative that the West and Islam are in conflict, or modern life and Islam are in conflict. I also believe that Muslim communities have a responsibility as well. Al-Qaeda and ISIL do draw, selectively, from the Islamic texts. They do depend upon the misperception around the world that they speak in some fashion for people of the Muslim faith. That Islam is somehow inherently violent, that there is some sort of clash of civilizations. Of course, the terrorists do not speak for over a billion Muslims who reject their hateful ideology. They no more represent Islam than any madman who kills innocents in the name of God represents Christianity or Judaism or Buddhism or Hinduism. No religion is responsible for terrorism. People are responsible for violence and terrorism. And to their credit, there are respected Muslim clerics and scholars not just here in the United States but around the world who push back on this twisted interpretation of their faith. They want to make very clear what Islam stands for. And we're joined by some of these leaders today. These religious leaders and scholars preach that Islam calls for peace and for justice. And tolerance toward others, that terrorism is prohibited. That the Quran says whoever kills an innocent, it is as if he has killed all mankind. Those are the voices that represent over a billion people around the world. But if we are going to effectively isolate terrorists, if we're going to address the challenge of their efforts to recruit our young people, if we're going to lift up the voices of tolerance and pluralism within the Muslim community. Then we've got to acknowledge that their job is made harder by a broader narrative that does. Exist in many Muslim communities around the world that suggests the West is at odds with Islam in some fashion. The reality which, again, many Muslim leaders have spoken to is that there's a strain of thought that doesn't embrace ISIL's tactics, doesn't embrace violence. But does buy into the notion that the Muslim world has suffered historical grievances. Sometimes that's accurate. Does buy into the belief that so many of the ills in the Middle East flow from a history of colonialism or conspiracy. Does buy into the idea that Islam is incompatible with modernity or tolerance, or that it's been polluted by Western values. So those beliefs exist. In some communities around the world they are widespread. And so it makes individuals, especially young people who already may be disaffected or alienated, more ripe for radicalization. And so we've got to be able to talk honestly about those issues. We've got to be much more clear about how we're rejecting certain ideas. So just as leaders like myself reject the notion that terrorists like ISIL genuinely represent Islam, Muslim leaders need to do more to discredit the notion that our nations are determined to suppress Islam. That there's an inherent clash in civilizations. Everybody has to speak up very clearly that no matter what the grievance, violence against innocents doesn't defend Islam or Muslims, it damages Islam and Muslims. And when all of us, together, are doing our part to reject the narratives of violent extremists. When all of us are doing our part to be very clear about the fact that there are certain universal precepts and values that need to be respected in this interconnected world, that's the beginnings of a partnership. As we go forward, we need to find new ways to amplify the voices of peace. And tolerance and inclusion, and we especially need to do it online. We also need to lift up the voices of those who know the hypocrisy of groups like ISIL firsthand. Including former extremists. Their words speak to us today. And I know in some of the discussions these voices have been raised, I witnessed horrible crimes committed by ISIS. It's not a revolution or jihad, it's a slaughter. I was shocked by what I did. This isn't what we came for, to kill other Muslims. I'm 28. Is this the only future I'm able to imagine? That's the voice of so many who were temporarily radicalized and then saw the truth. And they've warned other young people not to make the same mistakes as they did. Do not run after illusions. Do not be deceived. Do not give up your life for nothing. We need to lift up those voices. And in all this work, the greatest resource are communities themselves. Especially like those young people who are here today. We are joined by talented young men and women who are pioneering new innovations. And new social media tools, and new ways to reach young people. We're joined by leaders from the private sector, including high-tech companies, who want to support your efforts. And I want to challenge all of us to build new partnerships that unleash the talents and creativity of young people, young Muslims, not just to expose the lies of extremists but to empower youth to service. And to lift up people's lives here in America and around the world. And that can be a calling for your generation. So that's the first challenge. We've got to discredit these ideologies. We have to tackle them head on. And we can't shy away from these discussions. And too often, folks are, understandably, sensitive about addressing some of these root issues. But we have to talk about them, honestly and clearly. And the reason I believe we have to do so is because I'm so confident that when the truth is out, we'll be successful. Poverty alone does not cause a person to become a terrorist. Any more than poverty alone causes somebody to become a criminal. There are millions of people, billions of people in the world who live in abject poverty, and are focused on what they can do to build up their own lives, and never embrace violent ideologies. Conversely, there are terrorists who've come from extraordinarily wealthy backgrounds, like Osama bin Laden. What's true, though, is that when millions of people, especially youth, are impoverished and have no hope for the future, when corruption inflicts daily humiliations on people, when there are no outlets by which people can express their concerns, resentments fester. The risk of instability and extremism grow. Where young people have no education, they are more vulnerable to conspiracy theories and radical ideas. Because it's not tested against anything else, they've got nothing to weigh. And we've seen this across the Middle East and North Africa.